This is the first episode on an analysis of what I consider the greatest novel ever written, the epic whaling adventure story, Moby Dick. This first episode covers chapters 1 through 3 and is centered around a theme that is also the title of this episode, the idea of Allotheism. Allotheism is a word that means the worship of strange gods. However, we are going to enhance that definition a bit. Really, it's the understanding of worship that we will be modifying. Worship is the feeling or expression of reverence and adoration of a deity. In these first chapters of Moby Dick, we will understand worship to be more of a complex fascination, to be irresistibly drawn to the attention of something, like a serpent whose gaze fascinates its prey. It is to be deprived of any resistance by the power of such magnetic and macabre interest, like one who peers into an abyss and is called by it to step in. Allotheism in our context is therefore to be fascinated by the strange, the peculiar, that which is dual-natured, to be haunting and lovely, a popular word used to describe such phenomena at the time of Moby Dick, the queer. We are reminded of the British Indian biologist and mathematician J. Haldane, who said, "Now my own suspicion is that the universe is not only queerer than we suppose, but queerer than we can suppose. I suspect that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamed of or can be dreamed of in any philosophy." The strange unknown is an aspect of life seldom given attention, despite the ubiquity of its experience. Moby Dick's first chapter sets the stage in such mystic weirdness, a subject matter usually reserved for the oddest of niche grimoires and the irreverent musings of bastardized philosophy into the metaphysical. The first line of Moby Dick, the famous entry of our narrator and the perspective in which the story is told, begins with a depersonalized introduction. "Call me Ishmael." It is the way one introduces themselves when speaking directly to another person, and not how a typical narrative from the first person begins. "I am Ishmael," or "my name is Ishmael" would be used in a story of someone simply recounting their tale to the general unknown reader. "Call me Ishmael" is personal to the reader, even as he is depersonalized to himself. The poetic prose of Moby Dick is that of the traditional oral storytelling format, masterfully translated into the rigid cement of text without losing any of the animism of that most ancient of linguistic modes. It is a theme we will explore throughout the novel, but for now, let us move on. Ishmael tells us of his morose and languor. Having no money and no interest, he decides to visit the ocean. "Having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery parts of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my hypos get such an upper hand of me, that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball." With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. "I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this. If they but knew it, almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me." Ishmael gives us two perspectives. One is the dark night of his soul, a phrase that comes from a poem by a 16th century Spanish mystic, St. John of the Cross, his own commentary of which describes the dark night of the soul as a phase of passive purification of the spirits in the mystical development. We can understand it as a sort of crisis of faith, or even the ego, a neurosis of the spirit through a difficult and painful period of one's life. You may be more familiar with Douglas Adams' book, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, a comedy about a holistic detective, Dirk Gently. The title itself is a play on that treatise by St. John of the Cross. A savage and immutable boredom and torpor, an eclipse of the spirit. This is the first perspective Ishmael opens up the narrative with. The second perspective is what to do with that damp and drizzly November of the soul, when one begins to feel the need to start knocking people's hats off, or to throw themselves on their sword like Cato, who was a Roman politician who martyred himself by his own sword, rather than see Julius Caesar assume power. When that neurosis intensifies into destructive behavior, The answer, Ishmael attests, if they but knew, is to find the ocean as soon as possible. He goes on to describe the fascination of that eternal yawning abyss, how people tend to just peter towards the edge of the shore and stare out. But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water, and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange. Nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No. They must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues, inlanders all. They come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles of the compasses of all those ships attract them thither? In the next paragraph, Ishmael describes this metaphysical attraction of water, that there is magic in it. He says to take someone absent-minded, in a trance if you will, and stand that man up and let him walk, and infallibly he will lead you to water. Should you be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment if your caravan happen be supplied with a metaphysical professor. Yes, as everyone knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. Ishmael goes deeper into the mythological and even cosmic importance of the ocean, even likening everyone to Narcissus, attributing his death not to the love of his own reflection, but the water and its strange fascination. We also see Ishmael continue to draw from his vast knowledge of history, myth, and literature, as if all those things were taking place currently in his life. It's a phenomena of the psychosis state Ishmael finds himself in that we will explore in chapter 2 and 3. Why upon your first voyage as a passenger did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration? When first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land, why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity and own brother of Jove? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper, the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who because he could not grasp the tormenting mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life. And this is the key to it all. Ishmael's neurotic personality begins to really shine through as he stresses that going to sea as a passenger is not advisable, and he spends a good deal of time explaining this. It's humorous and almost accusatory, even insulting to some extent. Being either a passenger or a captain takes away from the experience of the ocean. It's too much work to run or take care of a ship, and doing nothing makes one restless and quarrelsome. Being a simple sailor is best. Partly we see him justifying his own lot and position in life. He neither has the money to be a passenger nor the status to be a captain, and justifies being ordered around by asking, who ain't a slave? Well then, however the old sea captains may order me about, however they may thump and punch me about, I have the satisfaction of knowing that it is all right, that everybody else in one way or other is served in much the same way, either in a physical or metaphysical point of view, that is, and so the universal thump is passed around, and all hands should rub each other's shoulder blades and be content. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor, because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay passengers a single penny that I ever heard of. On the contrary, passengers themselves must pay. Ishmael tells us that the act of paying is the most uncomfortable infliction that the two orchid thieves entailed upon us, meaning Adam and Eve, and the Pandora's box of problems that resulted from their mistake. But being paid is incomparable, and such a marvelous feeling, considering that we so earnestly believe money to be the root of all earthly ills, and that on no account can a moneyed man enter heaven. Ah, how cheerfully we consign ourselves to perdition. Ishmael is going to bemoan the problems of society in almost every aspect. It's one of the strong indications of his unstable mental state going into the novel. Everything is wrong about everything. It's as much a projection of his own dissatisfaction with life as it is a genuine critique of life and society's absurdities. Perhaps the strongest character trait of Ishmael is this ability to find the cosmic and mystical significance of something, understand its purpose, come to terms with his place in that order, and move on without a second thought. Such an explanation is how he finds himself yearning for a voyage, one that he specifically decides will be a whaling voyage. As he's tried merchant ships before, he suspects that the fates, divine providence, the stage managers of that unaccountable influence is dogging him on. But just as he recognizes the preordained nature of his call to the ocean, he also admits his own fascination spurring him on. Chief among these motives was the overwhelming idea of the great whale himself. Such a portentous and mysterious monster aroused all my curiosity. Then the wild and distant seas where he rolled his island bulk, the undeliverable nameless perils of the whale. These, with all the attending marvels of 1,000 Patagonian sights and sounds, helped to sway me to my wish. With other men, perhaps such things would not have been inducements. But as for me, I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas and land on barbarous coasts. Not ignoring what is good, I am quick to perceive a horror, and could still be social with it would they let me, since it is but well to be on friendly terms with all the inmates of the place one lodges in. Even the horrors get that universal thump, the cosmos indiscriminately jailing all its inhabitants to this existence, and Ishmael would be there to greet them, feeling a vague camaraderie with the unknown and wonderful terrors of the deep. Ishmael's Allotheism, his fascination for the strange, is ultimately what lures him to go on an adventure. He ends chapter 1, which was aptly named Loomings, like this. By reason of these things, then, the whaling voyage was welcome, the great floodgates of the wonder world swung open, and in the wild conceits that swayed me to my purpose, two and two there floated into my inmost soul endless processions of the whale, and, midmost of them all, one grand hooded phantom, like a snow hill in the air. This is the setting and mindset of Ishmael that is a necessary exposition for the beginning of the story, taking us into Chapter 2, Carpetbag. Ishmael stuffs, presumably all of his possessions, into an old carpetbag, amounting to a shirt or two. In his pocket is no more than a handful of silver pieces. He arrives in New Bedford and has several days before he can book passage to his desired destination, Nantucket. New Bedford is the current popular site of whaling, but Ishmael is romantic and will only set sail on a Nantucket vessel. It is the lore and history of Nantucket that appeals to him, because there was a fine, boisterous something about everything connected with that famous old island, which amazingly pleased me. Besides, though, New Bedford has of late been gradually monopolizing the business of whaling, and though in this matter poor old Nantucket is now much behind her, yet Nantucket was her great original, the Tyre of this Carthage, the place where the first dead American whale was stranded. Where else but from Nantucket did those aboriginal whalemen, the Red Men, first sail out in canoes to give chase to the Leviathan, and where but from Nantucket too did that first adventurous little sloop put forth, partly laden with imported cobblestones, so goes the story, to throw at the whales, in order to discover when they were nigh enough to risk a harpoon from the bowsprit. Ishmael recognizes his own dissociation, which I argue is central to the narrative of the entire story. Ishmael often refers to himself in the third person. So wherever you go, Ishmael, said I to myself, as I stood in the middle of a dreary street shouldering my bag, and comparing the gloom towards the north with the darkness towards the south, wherever in your wisdom you may conclude to lodge for the night, my dear Ishmael, be sure to inquire the price, and don't be too particular. As he walks along the street, he passes any inn that seems either too jolly or expensive, despite the misery of the cold and his worn boots. Of the streets he says this: blocks of blackness, not houses on either hand, and here and there a candle, like a candle moving about in a tomb. It appears to us that Ishmael finds everything awful and gloomy. People don't realize the homes they have made for themselves are coffins. Finally coming to a poor and crooked building with a swinging sign that reads The Spouter Inn, Peter Coffin. The forbidding and ominous words of spouter and coffin are not lost on Ishmael. Whale and death. I imagine Ishmael stood in front of the closed entrance for quite some time. The cold and hunger sends him on a tirade of the parable of Lazarus and the Dives, or the rich man, and how Ishmael is in a worse Euroclydon, a northern tempest wind, than the one that shipwrecked St. Paul in the Bible. But even the worst storm is pleasant to anyone indoors, observing from a house with windows. Ishmael says this: these eyes are windows, and this body of mine is the house. What a pity they didn't stop up the chinks and crannies, though, and thrust in a little lint here and there. But it's too late to make any improvements now. The universe is finished, the copestone is on, and the chips were carted off 1,000,000 years ago. Poor Lazarus there, chattering his teeth against the curbstone for his pillow, and shaking off his tatters with his shiverings. He might plug up both ears with rags and put a corncob into his mouth, and yet that would not keep out the tempestuous Euroclydon. Ishmael's cosmic level of complaint at having to enter into an unfamiliar building is one of many instances in Moby Dick that at first glance seem out of place and just wasting the reader's time with a random stream of consciousness. But it's these little details that bring Ishmael to life, makes him relatable, and pulls us into the book's unique storytelling style. Ishmael is shy, awkward, and depersonalized. How often do we sit staring at our phone waiting for an uncomfortable call or email, cursing the day we were born that should lead us to such a position? Or maybe it is an interview, or any menial task that forces us out of our own walled-in comfort zone. Ishmael wishes his body could simply be sealed from a storm, but the universe is finished, and there was no escaping entering that tattered building. At the end of his monologue, as he will often do after concluding that the myth and cosmic proportions of his situation are established and outside of his immediate control, he simply moves on. He knows there's no use in dwelling on these things, and ends the chapter saying, "But no more of this blabbering now. We are going a whaling, and there is plenty of that yet to come. Let us scrape the ice off our frosted feet and see what sort of place this spouter may be." The use of the first-person plural here reinforces the sense of the reader being part of the story. Ishmael is witnessing this story unfold along with us, as if he were an observer in his own life. Chapter 3 is the Spouter Inn, and although the longest of these first 3 chapters, it will have the briefest analysis, as the focus of this episode remains on the theme of Allotheism and his depersonalization. Those themes, however, find their natural resolution in this chapter, from which the rest of the book can build off of and spring from. Ishmael enters the Spouter Inn, and immediately compares it to some condemned old craft, and soon finds himself studying a large oil painting that covers one wall. It's worn out and defaced, and intrigues Ishmael, its true purpose bothering him to no end. It's a mass of shades and shadows, and he goes through a series of interpretations, viewing it from every angle, in different lighting, inquiring anyone around as to its meaning. He concludes that it must be a whale, in the midst of a hurricane trying to leap clear of a ship, but impaling its mighty frame on the 3 mastheads. It may be that it is the true intention of the painting's original design, but as a reader we can't help but notice Ishmael's tendency to see things as he wants. In Ishmael's current state of mind, everything mundane has become reimagined and transformed into a living, mythical projection of his own depersonalized sense of strangeness. The bar at the end of the inn is built to look like a whale's maw. Even a large jawbone of a whale is actually placed to help this imagery. He likens the bartender to Jonah, and it turns out that is what everyone calls him. Ishmael is critical of everything in society, and finds the whole process of drinking liquor in marked-out glasses for money abominable, and how sailors will return from years-long whaling voyages only to step first back into the whale's mouth for a drink. Projecting from the further angle of the room stands a dark-looking den, the bar, a rude attempt at a right whale's head. Be that how it may, there stands the vast arched bone of the whale's jaw, so wide a coach might almost drive beneath it. Within are shabby shelves, ranged round with old decanters, bottles, flasks, and in those jaws of swift destruction, like another curse to Jonah, by which name indeed they called him, bustles a little withered old man, who for their money dearly sells the sailors deliriums and death. Abominable are the tumblers into which he pours his poison, though true cylinders without within, the villainous green goggling glasses deceitfully tapered downwards to a cheating bottom. Parallel meridians rudely pecked into the glass surround these footpads goblets. Fill to this mark, and your charge is but a penny. To this, a penny more, and so on to the full glass the Cape Horn measure, which you may gulp down for a shilling. The manic cynicism Ishmael appears to be in reminds me of a scene in the book Girl Interrupted, in which Susanna finds herself staring at the black and white checkered floor of an ice cream parlor, and it seemed that the contrast of the tiles represented every indecision and opposite in life, spelled out for her in a crude language of bold, ugly squares. The phenomena of a depersonalized state to take that which is mundane and familiar and approach it as something new and alien, foreign, ambiguous, alive, as strange, is the very core of Ishmael's narrative. Ishmael's active literary and mythic imagination brings the elements that held no interest for him all his life, indeed, in the lives of society around, into this newfound fascination. We are comfortable surrounded by the familiar, but when your own body and mind go through a change of season, a dark winter's night of the soul, the shadows cast to transform your world inside out. The masks of other people, and all the textiles and knickknacks and buildings and artifacts fall off, revealing the writhing bones and organs of all that presupposed banality. The first 2 chapters of Ishmael's tangents and mystical musings of the world around him make sense now. It is a pseudo-psychedelia, the lore and philosophies he grew up learning, and that society accepts or is culturally relevant, such as Christian principles and the Bible, come to life in his depressive dolor. He understands the worship of the sea by the ancient Greeks and Persians, or the parable of Lazarus the beggar out in the cold streets. They are no longer stories to him, but actualizations in his own experiences, a movie reel of this collective knowledge playing before his eyes in real time, in symbols and designs, behavior and phenomena, both imagined and felt. All the myths and legends and religions are animated to him in a way that many of the people who may study or believe in them fail to truly comprehend. And this is a big aspect of religion and philosophy that he criticizes throughout the book. Yet even with this is our clear view of Ishmael just romanticizing and mythologizing his life, something characteristic of that mental state he is in. He dramatizes every little inconvenience because he is in that juxtaposition of psychedelic hyper-awareness and depersonalization. Ishmael's apprehension sees him complain to Peter Coffin, the landlord, about his roommate that he will have to share a bed with. While there will be time to explore Queequeg in future episodes, at this time, from Ishmael's perspective, he works himself into a panic when in the late hours of the night the savage enters the room, and Ishmael, full of preconceived fear and anxiety, hides in the covers of the bed and watches Queequeg first in horror and then fascination. Queequeg stashes away the head he could not sell, pulls out a small mannequin, an ebony idol of a strange and foreign god, says a prayer, and gives an offering to it. The whole time, Ishmael is too neurotic to announce himself to his sleepmate. It is like being a child in bed, whose parents walk in to check in on them, and the kid, in some inexplicable dread, pretends to be asleep and waits for his parents to leave. Ishmael realizes that Queequeg is about to get into bed, but before finding the words to speak, Queequeg suddenly pulls out a wicked tomahawk, which as it turns out doubles as a pipe, stuffs it with tobacco, lights it, and puffs on it as he springs into the bed, to which Ishmael suddenly yelps or sings out in surprise, and Queequeg, just as surprised, feels around and touches Ishmael. Ishmael rolls out of bed and frantically tries to get a handle of things, and Queequeg is swinging his tomahawk around, neither man understanding the other. The landlord comes in from the commotion and settles the situation, and as powerful as Ishmael's neurotic bias proved to be, in an instance, just like that, it was gone. He realized that this cannibal savage was tidy and neat and respectful, and most importantly that he was a human too. Ishmael realized that Queequeg had equal reason to be afraid of him, as both had to share a bed with a stranger. Better to sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian. And what Ishmael really means is even the most upstanding citizen is capable of the lowest lows, and the most savage person the highest highs. That indeed no title or identity can preconceive someone's character. It is by their actions, not their skin or beliefs, that necessarily dictate the amiability of someone. Ishmael settles into bed with Queequeg, both promising to keep their space, and the chapter concludes with Ishmael saying that he never slept better in his life. Ishmael is by no means a saint. He's not the cool-headed character of flawless countenance that always gets everything right. He's no moral paragon, and nor does he try to be. He's a man on the edge of insanity, easily distracted by his own imagination, and he's awkward in conversation. But he is sharp and witty, and a fast learner, and we see his growth evolve him, sometimes polarizing his thoughts from the very previous line. Ishmael is volatile and holds on to nothing. He would change his mind from a lifelong opinion just to spite someone that agrees with him if he finds that person annoying. Queequeg in many ways is everything Ishmael is not. Comfortable in his own skin, cool-headed, devoted, grounded. They balance each other out despite how unusual a friendship they make. But oddity is the theme of this odyssey, and Ishmael is just beginning to voyage into the strange, strange abyss that calls to him.